Hey, good morning. Thank you, Michael, and thanks all of you. One disclaimer. So you get a nice breakfast this morning. So thanks to the great service provided. If the Surgeon General was here, you wouldn't get that breakfast. You'd get, when the Surgeon General comes, you'd get the little bowl of fruit and maybe a cup of yogurt. All right. But since she's not here this morning, we had a real breakfast, and so it's a good way to get started. But thank you all very, very much. I know we have some allies and partners that are here. Thank you very much. The United States Army recognizes that it never fights alone, and so having allies and partners represented here is a big deal. Well, thanks, Mr. Secretary. I know you're a little bit under the weather, so I'm going to sit on this side of the chair. But
so there's something about this breakfast. Dr. Esper was down for the count last week. The chief is now sick because he attended, and I'm sick. So look out, McConnville, right?
Right. So maybe what we should have a congressional breakfast. Is that what you're saying?
Ooh, man, it's getting hot. He said it, I didn't.
That's right. I can say that. You can. Well, thanks. We appreciate you coming over. And obviously, the main topic we want to talk about this morning is the Army budget, and we'll see what the timing looks like, and hopefully you'll talk a little bit about that as we get started. But before we talk specifically about the direction the Army is heading in and the budget that's necessary to support that, certainly over the past couple of weeks, the topic of Army family housing has been in the news a lot. And could you talk to us a little bit about what steps the Army has taken over these past couple of weeks when this topic really has broken at the national level? What are your concerns, and what can we look forward to in the weeks, months, years to come?
The entire leadership team is very concerned. We're grateful for news agencies like Reuters and families stepping forward to talk about the challenges that they face and the inability for them to get resolution to the challenges that they've had. So it's always important to pay attention, but to have other agencies come out and help you get visibility about yourself as a cause of concern. And we have to do better at managing our enterprise and understanding where the problems are, what is the health of our installations. So more so than anything is for us to be able to manage this process better and to empower our soldiers and civil servants that live on the installations to have the recourse necessary to address these challenges with, if in this case, a public-private partnership, not a government-owned facility. So a lot of things we're looking at, from management to empowerment of the end customer, and to work better at managing this process overall.
Good, thanks. Obviously, this is a foundational quality of life issue and truly a readiness issue for the Army as we move forward. And I suspect there may be some other questions about that as we move through this morning's discussion. So let's turn now to the budget. I guess the latest expectation says that maybe 12 March or so, maybe when the budget will be delivered to the Congress and then start to have the detailed discussions that are necessary. So we recognize that obviously you can't get ahead of that process and talk specifics. But can you talk with us a little bit about how did the Army build this budget? What were the priorities? What was the methodology that you used? In the term that's been talked about a lot over the past couple of months has been the famous or perhaps infamous night court that I know you were a critical part of. So could you talk with us a little bit about how did you develop this budget?
The Army staff has a great sense of humor, don't they?
Depends on the day or the hour of the day, I suspect.
They do. This journey really started 2 years ago when we aligned the 18 and 19 budgets against the 6 modernization priorities. But we've maintained readiness as the #1 priority for the force to ensure that the home station training, the CTC rotations, and to get the highest state of readiness for as many brigade combat teams as possible. We're approaching almost half of our brigade combat teams at the highest state of readiness. So very pleased about that trajectory. It remains strong. But the alignment in particular for modernization in the fiscal year 18 and 19 with the great support of the Congress where we executed some above-threshold reprogrammings to really prime the pump in S&T against 31 signature priorities, started in those two, then within that budget deal, the 18-19 budget deal. So in this 20 effort, what folks will see here in a couple weeks is really opening that aperture as we go across the FIDIP. And the alignment we found in the just north of $30 billion in cuts and reductions, as well as cost avoidance. So if you walk down the balance sheet, it's about $8 billion in cost avoidance and about $22 billion in just cuts or terminations, so that we could realign the funding against our priorities. So as you approach the end of this FIDIP, you'll see a shift towards new development of new weapon systems, a pretty dramatic shift in the ratio between legacy and developmental programs. You mentioned Night Court. That was really the process that was developed. The Secretary and the Chief wanted to get heavy leader involvement into the process. So we invested just north of about 60 hours for the entire senior leadership team. So particular G codes and leaders in the Secretariat and the major commanders. Principals only, and we ran through every program in the budget. Have not seen something like that since Robert Gates did it about 10 years ago. Pretty dramatic spring and summer, and some long, hot days, which the staff had to have fun with it, so they branded it Night Court, because it was kind of that Shark Tank variety. You went in there and you tried to explain your program to the leadership, and if it didn't survive contact, it was out.
So did they name you Mr. Wonderful?
No, I was just advising the Secretary and the Chief. That's all I did.
The Secretary and you, the Chief, the Vice Chief, the Sergeant Major of the Army, truly all the Army senior leaders have made a conscious and noticeable effort and emphasis on the total force. As you went through this process, how important was that aspect in making these decisions, the ability to sustain readiness across the total force?
We had representatives, obviously, from the Guard and the Reserve in the room, and it was not us versus them. I mean, we're looking at all of the brigade combat teams and their readiness posture, so there was no differentiation between that. The comprehensive look for investments across the force was so that we could maintain that constant state of readiness. So there really was no differentiation.
And obviously, when the budget is delivered to the Congress, then the conversations will begin in earnest about specific programs. Can you talk a little bit about the conversations that you and the other Army senior leaders have had with the Congress so far about prioritization, about process? And then surely, I think it's reasonable to be expected that once the specifics of the budget are known, there will be members representing their constituents who may be adversely affected either by terminations or by reductions. How will you deal with that? How will the Army deal with that?
Heavy on the communication. I think, as I mentioned before, with the 18 and 19 budgets and 20, we've delivered a modernization strategy. We've been very consistent about where we're trying to take the Army to have the Army we need by 2028. With that comes very difficult choices. And in this fiscal 20, folks will see that. But it's giving them the heads up and understanding that if a company in your particular state or district is impacted, there's also immense opportunity that will present itself as we proceed along the future years defense plan, and to see where that opportunity exists and how they can compete and win new opportunities. We are trying to enable the national defense strategy, and taken some pretty dramatic steps in order to get there. And we think that we've been consistent. And when you're consistent about where you're trying to take the organization and you work with companies, they'll adjust. But it's when you blindside them on a budget drop day, that's very different. And then those leaders can't manage expectations and they can't adjust their investments, their product lines to survive. But that's just the very nature of a partnership, just a lot of communication.
Before we open it up for questions, just a question about last question from me, a question about timeliness. Typically by design, the president's budget is delivered to the Congress in early February. That's going to be delayed for a while. There are lots of competing budget priorities, certainly that the administration and the Congress and the department are contending with. How concerned are you about getting a budget by the 1st of October? And if not, can you talk a little bit about what the effects are if we find ourselves in a situation with or a series of continuing resolutions?
So continuing resolutions breed mediocrity. I mean, we had a 10-year run where officers did not see an appropriations bill. You can't have predictability in an environment where you're getting, an installment every 3 or 6 months. And how do companies know if they're going to get paid or not? How can they go out and buy long lead parts? How can you get the system primed to hit optimal levels? So I know it puts the Congress in a difficult spot. They've lost about at least 6 weeks of their process. The indications I heard from the committees of jurisdiction over the Defense Department is that they're still going to press hard on their schedules to try to have their bills marked and moving through the summertime. So it puts them in a difficult spot. We'll have to work very hard with them during the posture season to get them the information they need to make the disposition of the budgets. But we're touch wood that we're going to get there by October 1st. But they're in a tough place.
Good. Well, thanks, Mr. Secretary. And open up. I know folks came. We had a wonderful breakfast, but you didn't come here for the food. You came for an opportunity to engage with the Undersecretary of the Army. So if we've got some microphones. Alex and some others have some microphones. Okay, Michael, please.
Hi, thanks. Patrick Tucker with Defense One. Good to see you again, Mr. Secretary. You might have seen over the weekend, Microsoft employees lodged a protest to their company over the partnership between the Army and Microsoft over the HoloLens, the heads-down display. And in their protest, the employees refer to it as a weapons system. So I wonder if you can say here today, very specifically, what role you want that system to serve in a combat setting, whether or not you would consider any sort of ethical review of its use, and what sort of conversations you've had with Microsoft before and after. Thanks.
The conversations I've had with Microsoft are between us and Microsoft, but I would say I'm very encouraged by CEO Satya Nadella's comments in Barcelona. I believe they were yesterday, where he intends to develop products that defend our democracy. With respect to the IVAS system, it's much greater than just night vision or day sights. It's a mechanism for us to measure soldier performance and collect data on individuals, greater situational awareness. So it's a much more complex system than just night vision goggles. But it's a signature priority for us in our budget. We're encouraged by the initial steps we've made with the Microsoft Corporation, and we're looking forward to developing that product.
Good, thanks. Alex? Okay.
Hi, Secretary. Ashley Roki with Janes. I wanted to follow up on the night court process. Are you able to sort of discuss some of the areas or programs that are going to be cut? And then what can we expect to see further in the fit up of specific areas, maybe modernization, that you're going to funnel this $30 billion? And after this process, round 2 of night courts going on, what do you hope to find that you didn't uncover before of additional savings?
So I guess without getting out in front of the president, because I need to keep my job, if you look at our modernization strategy that we delivered to Congress in the spring of 2018, it lays out in there, here are the 6 priorities, here's why we need to prime this pump, we need north of $20 billion to finance these weapon systems in the out years. You'll see where those weapon systems are and what's legacy today versus what's in there, and you'll know that's where we're going. So I just try to give you a hint until I can talk about it here in a month. With respect to night court round 2, the Secretary and the Chief have empowered the major commanders and the assistant secretaries on the Army staff to drive what we call the PEG process, which sit over top of the investment accounts. And where we're trying to hone in is empower the leadership to drive this process, but ultimately to put strategies over top of these investment portfolios. There are probably things that we could have done better in this process, but we learned a lot about ourselves have much greater visibility over where we've been investing over the years, and we'll potentially make adjustments. You'll see where the cuts and terminations are if you read the modernization strategy.
Could I, before we go to that, just to follow up on that, and Dr. Dale is here from Army Futures Command. Could you talk a little bit, Mr. Secretary, about how was this process different now with Army Futures Command than it perhaps has been in the past?
Army Futures Command put the flag in the ground on the 24th of August, so Mike Murray was still the G8 during this effort. Well, going forward, now as we approach the 21 budget, General Murray drives the peg for equipment with Dr. Jetty. So he and Dr. Jetty will continue to work on the investment portfolio for equipment, and then they will be the ones that present that to the Secretary and the Chief here this spring, summer time frame.
Good, thanks.
Yeah.
Michael.
Sydney, how are you?
Apparently inescapable. Sidney Friedberg, Breaking Defense.
We can change that.
But, there's a lot of emphasis on, fixing modernization, on going faster, on doing better. And then you look at things like, some recent reporting, yay, we got the 30 millimeter on the Stryker, but maybe the whole system is hackable. Or, yay, JLTV, is, getting to units, but, they totaled one, and Director of Operational Test and Evaluation says, oh, it's not operationally suitable. Just as two examples, how do you, A, address those two problems, but B, make sure that as you transition to faster, better, focused, you overcome these problems that keep on recurring, and don't take your eye off the ball of things like Stryker, like JLTV, that are not in the 31 programs and the big six.
Yeah, the budget, you'll see the reflection in the budget for the pursuit of programs like that and others, where there'll be investment dollars there. But when the prioritization just says that if you're going to go through this, all 31 of those will definitely be funded first. And as we approach declining fiscal environment, at the best will be flat in the out years. You have to prioritize.
Alex?
Hi, Matt Baynard, Defense Daily. Another on the night court process. I believe you just mentioned it was north of $30 billion, and I believe the earlier mark was around $25 billion. So Secretary Esper has previously characterized some of the conversations about cutting, lower tier programs as difficult because there's still value there, and people still find those, some value and important to them. When you realized that you had exceeded that mark, how did those conversations go in terms of determining, what would be cut? Did you find those process difficult in terms of, cutting the lower tier priorities? And when did you realize that you could exceed that $25 billion mark?
Well, reform was not just a target so we could pay an equipment bill. We need to be better with every dollar the taxpayer gives us. And there are a lot of priorities that aren't funded every year, which is why the chief will send an unfunded priorities list every year. All the chiefs do that, for that matter. So Dr. Esper is trying to, and the chief are trying to put in a behavior of reform so that we can do better with every dollar that we have to finance the Army the best way we're able. So there was the target of $20 billion, $25 billion you heard, that was just to pay equipment bills. But what they're trying to do is change the fundamental behavior of the Army to do better with every dollar we have. Make sense?
Okay, Michael?
Hi, Cannon Lee from National Defense. Can you talk about any assessments the Army might be performing right now to weigh the pros and cons of permanently stationing ABCTs in Europe rather than having rotational?
We're maintaining a heel-to-toe rotation, but the permanent stationing would be a choice made by the Office of the Secretary of Defense.
All right, this side of the room, you guys have been awfully silent here, all right? So I can't believe there's not a question. Okay, Michael in the back, please, and then Alex.
Hi. Ashley Tressel, Inside Defense. Thanks for coming, sir. I had a question about the wartime account, OCO. There's some talk about massive increases this year. Without getting into the details of that, can you just speak to, as we all know, the authority to do that is not guaranteed every year by Congress. So can you just speak to the importance of that account and keeping it, you know, arguing to Congress that you do in fact need those programs funded in that account?
Overseas contingency operations would pay the bills to meet national objectives and recapitalize our assets. So we clearly need to submit that request and hope that the Congress will dispose it accordingly.
Alex?
Sir, Bob Schultz, KMW. You were personally involved in some of the development for the optionally manned fighting vehicle. Recently, as I've looked at some of the draft RFPs, I've seen things come out that are secret, no foreign. When you look over the last 30 years, a lot of the new technology in combat vehicles has emerged from international partners and allies who are sometimes the closest allies of the United States. By creating no foreign requirements, you really exclude that technology coming into the U.S. Army. How do you deal with that? And are you not concerned that we're not going to get the best capability for the Army that we really should get at the best value?
This is the kind of conversation I have to have with you in a skiff. So I can't really elaborate on why we did that. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Secretary. Megan Myers, Army Times. So the Army is surging its recruiting efforts in terms of more recruiters, more marketing dollars, more research. How is the budget adjusting to meet that surge?
We've actually done that within the existing appropriation and the realignment of resources against the areas of focus, the 22 focus cities. Looked at some data just the other night and was extremely encouraged under Frank Muth and Steve Townsend's leadership to beat goals in Los Angeles, Portland, Houston, New York City, cities where for the last decade we have missed targets. So the energy and focus from this TRADOC leadership team has been outstanding, and we're very encouraged by this change in their approach.
Sir, Jeff Martin with Defense News. As we get closer to the INF treaty possibly expiring in October, how is the ability to go to further ranges going to increase your #1 priority at long-range precision fires?
We could be very aggressive from that standpoint. Obviously we would need the authority to proceed, but I know a lot of the folks in this room that represent some great American companies could help us make some adjustments, even on potentially existing platforms, to extend ranges. So, we'll see where that goes, but we're watching that very closely.
Hi, sir. Haley Britsky with Task and Purpose. We learned that the Marine Corps is kind of starting to have to teach young recruits about 9/11, given that many recruits are going to start being, entering into a war that they started before they were born and when they were too young to remember. Is this something that the Army is also running into, and how are you going to be kind of catering to those recruits, and what kind of lessons and things are you going to be teaching them about this?
I read about that in the Wall Street Journal last night. So I didn't see Task and Purpose yet, but I'll read it now as well. It's something that we actually have been talking about a great deal in the leadership team of professional military education, military history. And it's something where we're looking at even in ROTC as well as in all of our schools for our enlisted and non-commissioned officers to increase the amount of military history that we teach within the force. So it's something that Dr. Esterman, Chief, are very passionate about, and we are going to make some adjustments to do something very similar.
Mr. Secretary, if I could ask you, again, a topical issue that's raised since the President's emergency declaration regarding the border security. There's been postulated that some of that money may come out of current and prior year military construction accounts. I think Secretary Shanahan's been pretty clear that no decisions have been made, but can you talk with us a little bit about what's the process that the Army will use if the Army gets tagged with some of that bill? Sure. How do you go through that process to decide what projects might be affected?
So the Secretary Shanahan, General Dunford took a contingent of intergovernmental leaders down to the border over the weekend and came back, and we're going to sit down later this week to discuss their due diligence there and address how we would finance the construction of the wall. There are a couple of different funding accounts that would be over and above military construction, unexpended dollars from the Treasury to counter-narcotics funding and to go down the list before you would ever touch military construction. So they're going to come back. We're going to talk about really get commander's intent and then take that approach forward.
Good, thanks. I think that's about it. So, Mr. Secretary, talk with. What do you think the timing is now? Do we have dates and what we expect the budget to be delivered? We understand perhaps in 2 packets.
March 12th is my understanding, Tuesday the 12th, and we are going to have what you would normally see of like a traditional rollout at the Pentagon briefing room, and General Horlander's team goes, everybody, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines go, and then we go to a series of briefings with committees of jurisdiction, and then the posture starts. I think the Secretary Chief go the week after, 3rd week of March will be their first sets of hearings, and we'll go into the spring, which puts the authorizers in the tough spot to get those marks done around Memorial Day, and but we're going to hit it, put our foot on the gas here in about 3 weeks.
Because the Army staff's been resting to this point. I think that's right. That's right. So thanks. Well, Mr. Secretary, on behalf of all of us, thanks for taking the time this morning. We'll certainly look forward to the 12th of March and the actual budget drop. But you've given us, I think, some clear insights and some things to look forward as that budget gets delivered and the discussions to continue from that point. But I just say on behalf of all of us and certainly from your association, thanks for your sustained leadership. It has made a difference. Your mark has been indelibly imprinted upon the United States Army in a very positive way. So thanks for your service in uniform and your continued service in this uniform, leading the finest land force on the planet. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, ladies and gentlemen, a special thanks to Andy Toomey and Mantech. Thanks. These events simply are not possible without you. Thanks, Andy. Thank you all very, very much.
I figure I'll talk to the reporters.
Yeah.